That okay. I can't see the zoom pin. Here we go. All right, can we see the screen okay? Yes. All right. So real quickly to go over some of the technical writing pieces related to this class specifically. So if you remember from the introduction, I guess about a week ago now, we mentioned the scaffolding approach for the technical writing pieces of these different labs. So that's not to say that you will not be asked to write and talk about the other aspects to the lab. It's really these are going to be the portions specific to the different labs that you'll be getting specific technical writing feedback on. So kind of how well you followed, I guess, these tips and things to include from the technical writing piece and how clear it was. So for lab one, you might remember the abstract and the conclusion. So there's a lot of words on the slide, but I think when it comes to writing, one of the big tips there is to read a lot, right? So you're going to have to read a lot of these slides for yourself, internalize them, and really I'm hoping you use this as a resource for when you go to write your abstract and conclusion. Maybe you write it how you normally would and then come back to these resource slides and see, okay, did we check everything off that we need to check off? Did we hit on all the bullet points? Did we do everything we needed to? And then add or subtract accordingly. So a couple key points here with the abstract. It should summarize the report, state the main objectives, what you actually did, and then the most important qualitative and quantitative results and your conclusion. So I think we've written abstracts before in different classes, but these are the main points to hit on for this class and really abstracts in general. And it should be less than about 200 words. So that should be true for really all abstracts, and especially related to this class. And then similarly, but different also, the conclusions and the recommendations portions of your report. So describe what you concluded based on your lab experience, relate to specifics and to be more general circumstances, recommended changes or enhancements to the lab or the activity that you feel like would improve your learning experience for future students. And personally, I really like reading the conclusions to hear what all you come up with about what you concluded about the lab and see if that was pretty well in line with what we were hoping you would conclude about the lab. And then any tips or advice that you have for us from the viewpoint of the student. So that's where we'd like to record those things. Lots of things on this slide, but again, reference this while you're working through. So kind of a checklist of things to include in your abstract. So I'm going to leave this as an exercise to you to make sure that your abstracts include all of these different details. Here's an example abstract, and the color scheme relates to the slide that I just showed before, the abstract checklist. So of course, I'm not going to read all of this. You can do that yourself. And we try to categorize these different parts of the abstract and color code them to, like I mentioned, the checklist from before. So if you read through this, one of the pieces for this abstract that's missing is the implications of the answer from the checklist from before. Another example with a similar color coding scheme, trying to highlight the different portions of the checklist. This is missing something about the results of the study and the conclusion. So read through these ones and convince yourself of those aspects. Here's an example that I guess I put together last year for the wind tunnel testing lab. So I like to bring this up because this should be fairly fresh in your mind and something that you can personally relate to, as it only happened, 2 months ago now, if that. So you can read through this abstract, convince yourself of what's in there and what is not in there. So is this a good example? Is this a bad example? I want to leave that up to you to decide and think about. Another example from the wind tunnel testing lab. So this one's a little bit longer. Does that necessarily mean it's better? Does it hit on more points? You have to go back, read this one, compare it to the checklist, and kind of see how these abstracts, how you would rate those abstracts. So here's a conclusion checklist. So similar to what we had with the abstract, this is kind of just a checklist of things to include in the conclusion that you write. So again, same thing with the abstract here. I recommend that you take an initial draft of the abstract and conclusion, how you would write it without being trained on these things, and then go back through and see if you hit on all the items. So again, a lot of words here, but this is basically a conclusion example with highlighted portions of things that when I was reading through this conclusion, I related to the checklist. You can do the same thing and see how these things relate to yourself. All right, so specifically related to the Lab 1 assignment. So, like I mentioned at the beginning here, we're going to look closely from a technical writing viewpoint at the abstract and the conclusion. We're going to give you specific feedback on how well you wrote those things, how well you followed the checklist, how well you hit on the different items here that are mentioned in these slides. I'm asking that you highlight the checklist items. So I'm not going to require that, but I want to incentivize that a little bit by giving you some extra credit. And I think that's mentioned here. So 1 point for the abstract and 1 point for the conclusion. Now this is 1 point total for the abstract, not for each highlighted item. That'd be a lot. But this gives you a little bit of motivation to figure out how to highlight. So this is kind of something cool for LaTeX or Word or your word processing algorithm that you choose. If you do highlight these things and follow this color coding scheme or something very similar to it, that's worth 1 point for the abstract and 1 point for the conclusion. So that kind of just makes our lives a little bit easier when you are talking about something in the abstract and conclusion. We can see what section of the checklist you're looking for. But really the main motivation here is for you to refer back to those checklist items for the abstract or the conclusion and make sure that you hit on all of them. So it should be pretty clear if you didn't hit on one of the specific items because your abstract or conclusion just simply won't have that color in them. And that should be a very easy indicator that you need to include that. All right, so a couple more writing examples. So this is beyond and I guess in between the abstract conclusion, specifically related to this lab assignment here. So this kind of goes into about the level of detail that we're looking for when we talk about asking you to spend some time specifying what you did in the lab. So this doesn't include everything, right? This is just one blurb of one section of the lab. So specifically it looks like this is related to the ramp. So you can see that we're not too verbose. We're trying to be fairly concise and clear in the information that's presented. This is only a couple of sentences. I don't even know if this would qualify as a full paragraph, just talking about this one aspect of the lab. So hopefully that kind of puts things in perspective of the amount of writing and the level of description that we're looking for with regards to the other sections of the lab report. And then here's another one as well, kind of talking about some analysis of some ramp section. So I guess I obviously picked the most boring one, but this is just an example to give you an idea of the level of detail and complexity that we're going to be looking for, like I said already, in the other parts of the lab. So read this for yourself, kind of maybe come up with your own little checklist item of things to include when you're talking about other aspects here, aside from the technical writing focus pieces. So just as a reminder, keep in mind, there's more to write to this lab assignment for this lab 1 than just the abstract and conclusion. And that's going to be true for the other lab reports as well when we focus on the different technical writing pieces. We're just giving you specific technical writing feedback for lab 1 on the abstract and conclusion. The other parts of the procedure, things that you do there, the different aspects that were specified in the lab assignment itself, the different sections of the report are going to be graded for completeness, correctness, quality, kind of similar to how you would expect a typical lab report to be graded. So that's all I have for the technical writing pieces. I see there's a couple things here in the chat.